Mr. Corey Smith.
How are you, sir?
I am okay.
I got ideas.
I want you to tell me about your event that you went to. I think I read that you went to an event where there was a sort of women in Web3 style event.
Oh, yeah. So I went to a local event here in Atlanta called Women in Technology. I believe it's a national organization. This is the local chapter. Boy, was it not only well attended and well sponsored, really fascinating organization. And it was less of a networking event and more of like their annual kind of like wrap up award ceremony thing. But boy, do they do some really neat stuff, man. Like every major corporation is a sponsor of this. And I mean, like Cisco, State Farm, Home Depot, you name it. Obviously, the company I work for it was a gold sponsor. AWS, Microsoft, just like literally everybody. There's probably 300-400 major Fortune 50, Fortune 100 corporations, all donating a tremendous amount of money, and they raised $500,000 at the event. They weren't really recognizing or giving awards to women that night. What they were primarily doing was awarding scholarships, and it was kind of twofold that night. They were awarding scholarships to young women, which they focus on STEAM, right? Science, technology, math, those type of things. So they were providing scholarships to underprivileged girls, to both private, schools and also colleges. So they sent a lot of girls to college that night. But the thing that I thought was that was most interesting was all of these companies, these major corporations have these programs that I wasn't even aware of for single mothers. So they have these single mother programs for both employees within the companies and even just women in the population. That if you're a single mother, you can apply for this program. They will pluck you out of kind of obscurity, send you to school or train you in one of the technology fields or STEAM fields. And then they will employ you, and immediately coming out of training or school will pay you equitable range or rate pay. It's pretty amazing. So it was a really cool event to be a part of, and just like and then these women who are executives, and there's a lot of them. Delta Airlines was one of them, and some of these executive women who have several of them have retired and have come back to start scholarships for these both girls and single mothers. Have started these scholarships themselves with their own funds, and have started them and then continue to seek funds through donations. So I thought it was a really great event. And then just kind of talking about like what women are choosing to go into, and like to kind of pivot to what you were talking about earlier, talking about what women are interested in technology. And it's really interesting that they're really interested in these new things. A lot of talk about Web3, the Metaverse, and Web3 technologies. I'll tell you what, man, a lot of talk about blockchain.
The latest shiny thing, I guess.
I talked to people about what is your interest in this? And it wasn't like there was a lot of companies that were like their business is necessarily logically lean toward blockchain. But I think that there's a general consensus that they feel like, obviously the world's technologically moving towards Web3, and everybody feels that blockchain is one of, if not the core technology of the future in Web3.
That is interesting. And yet on the other side of it, you've got these several big hacks of blockchain projects via Discord and other things. So as much as the promise of blockchain is around security and immutability and whatever the other properties of blockchain are, in the last week or so, there's been some enormous hacks and scams. Really early days, really Wild West. But I'm interested to understand how And actually, this was borne out in the global financial crisis
Right.
a little while back now, that companies that were more diverse, that had a wider, more diverse board, a more diverse workforce, whether that be people of color, different sexualities, different genders, different life experience, the companies that had more diverse opinions based on people's life experience made better decisions and lasted better through the last global financial crisis than the more patriarchal kind of companies that had a groupthink kind of opinion and thing going on. So it'll be nice to think that these things are becoming more mainstream, and it'd be nice to think that you don't need to necessarily have to have a women in technology event, that it's just people in technology.
Right. Certainly things here in the United States, from a cultural standpoint, seem to be regressing in many senses, with, a lot of things that are happening here politically, with, the impending, which I heard from my wife, who's an attorney, say that it might come out today, that they're going to reverse Roe versus Wade, which of course is the infamous or famous abortion case, Supreme Court case here in the United States, which has far-reaching implications beyond abortion and privacy, contraception, other things, gay marriage, interracial marriage. There could be far-reaching implications to that. And, obviously there's been the gun debate here in the United States, and, the ability for anybody to just kind of, we like to think that we have laws in place that prevent people from just like willy-nilly buying firearms, but yet there's many loopholes that allow people to just go to gun shows that happen every weekend here and buy guns.
And we're about to come up on the 50th anniversary of Watergate.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's just a lot of things that feel kind of like we've taken some steps backwards culturally here in the United States. But at the same time, you see a lot of things that you would think at this stage in our evolution of our country and culture that wouldn't be necessary, like a group for women in technology. It should be just people in technology. But, I think that does still need to exist, or obviously does. And you see a lot of it. I worked recently with a very good friend of mine and colleague, and mentored her to pivot in her career towards a technology career. And she just began her career this week as a scrum master and project manager in the consulting business.
At the end of the day, it's pure economics, right? You can't run a business. Yeah. You can't run a business with an entire male workforce. You just can't. Right. So there's a skill shortages out there. There is things that need to be done. And so there's absolutely no way that you can win if you are discriminating based on gender. And actually, there's some really interesting stuff coming out of Saudi Arabia at the moment. There's more female entrepreneurs in Saudi Arabia than there are in the US, which
interesting.
Yeah.
The net danger of this is that not so much the diversity in culture, but it's the diversity of thought.
Right.
So I was having not to pivot again, I was having a conversation earlier with a creative colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine from Aflac, who works in the experience field. And we were talking about like what's next. And we were talking specifically about coming out of the Great Resignation, and like specifically about the labor shortage. And we had talked previously about how people don't want to go back to work, rising gas, like the odd thing about all of this press of or PR push of like people wanting people to come back to the office, and how that's never going to happen with rising gas prices and people just not wanting to come back to the office. But then the flip side of that is all of this real estate, these office spaces that exist certainly here and many other places in the world, in Atlanta, where we have all these high rises and buildings and office spaces that sit empty. We need more diversity of thought of, the kind of thinking that produced business models like Uber and Airbnb and VRBO, which when they first came out, people were like, that doesn't make any sense. How's that going to make money? And then, well, of course, here we are. What's going to happen to things like commercial real estate if we all end up working remotely? We're going to have some diversity of thought to as we move into the world of Web3, which is inevitable.
There's some ancient power dynamics going on. I don't necessarily want to put thoughts into Elon Musk's mind, but when he orders all of his people back to work to say, look, you can either work here in the office or you can quit, that strikes me as a little bit of a power play,
Sure.
A little bit of a control freak kind of mentality rather than
well, he's just trying to avoid layoffs.
That's true. If they quit, he doesn't have to pay them severance, and I guess that's
right.
That's one of the part of the equation. It's a really interesting topic. I think the businesses that are embrace diversity, however that looks, like I said, whether that be gender, whether that be people who've experienced different things, whether it's just people who have a slightly different take on the world, you would think that those businesses would win over a kind of yes man group think type of mentality.
The power dynamic has shifted a little bit, where it used to be your employer had all of the power. Now the employee has a little bit of power where they're like, hey, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to work for that amount of money. I'm not going to drive to the office. As a consulting company, as an example, I won't complicate it. We work with companies like long-term clients, and we, let's say we have a long-term contract with client X, big company, Fortune 100 company, and we have a contract with them, and they have a rate card, and we negotiated that rate card with them pre-pandemic for rates for certain positions. Now we have to hire a position at a certain rate that we negotiated in 2020, early 2020, 2019. Well, now that person is the rate because of their, not only because of the pandemic, the salaries have gone way up and they can dictate that, or now they want to be a contractor or a consultant. They're charging way more because we're not paying their benefits.
I don't know. I think the correction in the stock market might correct some of those things pretty
that's
quickly.
fair.
There's a lot of layoffs happening at the moment, and there's a lot of companies that are not worth what they said they were worth. I think I heard tonight that there's some business graduates coming out of the US that are getting $180,000 straight out of an MBA. Sounds like a lot to me, but
it is a lot.
But
on the flip side of that,
no experience. Do you think that some of these women in technology are able to steer the direction of companies? I mean, if they're working in product roles, are they pushing back and saying this isn't how women think? This is, women think differently to men, and therefore the UX should be totally different. And if you've got someone who's working on UX who's a woman, they would design something completely differently to.
I absolutely do, and they talk about it, and I think it's good. I think they're changing the way these companies approach product development and experience development. I think that they're changing the way that they approach their own culture, which I think is good. And I think that the culture permeates out through their products and services, right? And their approach to customer experience, their approach to customer service.
Because I can, and again, this is me being stereotypical, but I can see that in certain sectors and certain markets, and being really stereotypical. I can see it in things like fashion, and I can see it in influencers who are in the beauty market or in the fashion market. I can see the influence, but for something like Web3, I cannot see any female influence at all.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and let's stay on that topic. I like this for a minute because, and again, not to be stereotypical, but to be stereotypical, or my experience has been, is that women in general are more empathetic. And I think that lends itself to be more conducive to driving that empathy up and out through every facet of the organization, both in their work and in the culture.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And if you're in product design, you're in experience design, then female view of the world will deliver a different product to a male view of the world. I'm putting this through my own lens that you can see where online e-commerce, for example, I'm yet to see a female empathy lens applied to something like the metaverse. It seems like it's completely absent.
Which would be interesting and probably necessary. It's interesting that you say that. I'll make a statement and ask you a question, which just occurred to me. So I attend a fantastic event here every month or every 2 months in Atlanta called The Future Of, which is hosted by some very good friends of mine who run an experience agency here in town called Launch, Javier and Paul Carpenter. So every time we get together, we meet the most interesting people and we talk about things. And I always ask the same question of people that have a particular expertise in something. And I'm like, so in your area of expertise, who have you ever found that is doing it right? And I'm like, if you were to pick somebody out there, like on the web, who's doing it right? And they all unanimously said Sephora.
Right.
Ironically, but
I'd be interested to know whether the Sephora product team are male or female, or whether it makes a difference.
But that's the interesting thing. I would like to know that. But it is a website and a product primarily for women.
Yeah, and in terms of social media, Pinterest is a social media platform which has resonates a lot more with women than it does with men.
But the question for me is that's a chicken and the egg. Is Sephora or Pinterest created by women and therefore it's better, or is it because it's created for women and therefore it's better? But as you had stated in our previous podcast, and you had put the question out to our listeners, and I saw on LinkedIn as well, is the metaverse just filled with dudes? The more I think about that, that's a really interesting question. And this is the same with a lot of things.
Well, I had an interesting conversation with someone a week or so ago about online mall, a metaverse mall, and they came from a gaming background, and they sort of scoffed. Yeah. They scoffed at the idea of an online mall, a metaverse mall, and I said, well, why wouldn't a metaverse mall work? A mall is an environment that is a lot more gender neutral, probably skewed slightly towards females. It's non-aggressive. It's more about shopping and eating and socializing and less about killing people. So why wouldn't a metaverse mall work? There's no reason why it shouldn't. Why does it have to be the Dungeons and Dragons crowd that are deciding how we're going to spend our time in the metaverse?
So I'll tell you an interesting bit, because I would have disagreed with you until I actually had a conversation this year with somebody, and I can't tell you what company it was, but it was a major sports clothing manufacturer. I became friends with the CEO, and we had a long talk about the metaverse, and she told me about some of the things that she was really interested in. And one of the things that she was really interested in, which came from feedback from her buyers, right, was that they wanted to leverage the metaverse, so that they were interested in leveraging metaverse type technology to do like a virtual fashion show, like a mall, where you could see the new clothes modeled virtually.
That makes sense. So it comes back to our virtual beings from last week.
Right, because they going to like a fashion show or going to physically see it is a pain in the ass.
Yeah,
but they have to see it before they buy it, because they want to put it on display. They can buy it and they put it in their retail outlets. They want to be able to see it and get close to it and see how it looks or it hangs and things. And it was like the most asked for thing. So why not a virtual mall? back.
Next up on the agenda, I was sent an interesting link by a listener to a book. Do you remember books? Do you read? I know you read books. You're a book.
Of course I read books.
Person. I have to ask the question. Not everybody does read books anymore. Some people don't read books. Some people are content with the YouTube clip notes.
Yeah, I can't. In fact, I'm like fussy. I tried to do the Kindle and I can't even do a Kindle. I got to read a book.
Yeah, I can go both ways on that one. I do like a book because it doesn't run out of battery, but I can also read a book on a iPad or a Kindle type device. Just because some books I read are so bloody heavy that I don't want to carry them around.
Yeah, that's fair. And I still read. I'll call them comic books. They're graphic novels.
Graphic novels, of course, they're graphic novels.
I clarify that for my wife too, but I still read those in print too. I go to the comic book store and pick those.
Well, they're worth more if you keep them in plastic and don't read them, Corey.
What's the damn point of buying them if you don't read them?
I know there used to be like this. There were these like toy cars that we used to have as kids that called Matchbox cars.
They
were British. They were made of metal, and they were like these little miniature cars. And
I love those.
Me and my brother and my friends, we used to trash them. We used to coat them in kerosene, set them on fire, fill them full of sand, put them in sand castles, all that kind of stuff. And then, later on, somebody came and said, well, you should have kept them in the box. They would have been worth a lot more.
Well, what's the point if you can't blow them up?
I was a kid. Setting it on fire was a lot more fun. Somebody sent me a link to this book called Partial Truths, How Fractions Distort Our Thinking by James Zimring. And I haven't read it yet. I haven't bought it, haven't read it yet, but I'm going to read a couple of bits from the blurb and from the Google preview, which I think are kind of interesting. This goes to our theory that we have lost our collective minds. There is no critical thinking left in the world, that we have no idea what's going on. Charles Zimring argues that many of the mistakes that human mind consistently makes boil down to misperceiving fractions. We see slews of statistics that are essentially fractions, such as percentages, probabilities, frequencies, and rates, and we tend to misinterpret them. Sometimes bad actors manipulate us by cherry-picking data or distorting how information is presented. Other times, sloppy communicators inadvertently mislead us. Here's a fun example, which I think is amusing. It's fun. It's amusing. So there was once a fast food chain, apparently, who tried to compete with McDonald's Quarter Pounder by introducing a third pounder hamburger. Did you ever have a third pounder?
No.
Well, it flopped, apparently. And do you know why it flopped?
Because it sounds less than a quarter pounder.
You're correct. This could only, I think, I don't want to insult your fellow Americans, but it flopped.
I believe that's what people would think. It was like, that's less than a quarter pounder because it's got a 3 instead of a 4.
Consumers thought that a third pound was less than a quarter pound because 3 is less than 4. Yep.
I believe it. I can completely believe that, man. 100%.
All right. So anyway, here's some more examples. And these are kind of funny, but it's not funny because it ends up hurting people. And
it's not funny because it's true.
It's not funny. It's true. And people end up. So Yogi Berra. Who was Yogi Berra, Corey?
He was the famous coach of the Yankees.
Okay. So he was, apparently he had a talent for witticism.
Yes.
And once upon a time he went into a restaurant and ordered a pizza. And the chef behind the counter asked if he wanted the pizza cut into 4 or 6 slices. And he answered, "You'd better cut the pizza into 4 because I'm not hungry enough to eat 6."
Yep. I feel biased because why are all these examples Americans?
Maybe he's an American author, but maybe it happens elsewhere. He also said, baseball is 90% mental and the other half is physical.
Yes, I've heard that one before.
Some people just aren't built for fractions and probability. They can do calculus, they can do engineering maths, but they can't do. I'm the other way around. I can do statistics, but I can't do calculus.
Well, math is hard, dude.
It's not really.
Some math is hard.
Yeah, but statistics isn't. Probability isn't. Cognitive bias, and there's a whole bunch of other things going on. So there's another experiment that they've done, which is they've asked people to write down what they think 100 coin tosses would look like. There's never more than 3 of one particular side or the other.
Wait, what? Say that again?
Right. So they do an experiment. And they say, right, write down 100 coin tosses. So flip a coin, is it heads or tails? Flip a coin, is it heads or tails? Flip a coin, is it heads or tails? Flip a coin, heads or tails? It's a 50-50 chance. It's random probability. There is a probability, although small, that you would get 99 heads and 1 tail.
Right.
But humans, when asked to write down what 100 coin tosses would look like, there are never more than 3 heads or tails in a row.
I can't. That doesn't compute.
Right. Okay. So let's do it for 10. Okay.
So if there's not, but right. So if they write it, I'm lost on the write it down part.
They're writing it down. So they're basically asked to simulate probability.
Right.
So they know that the odds are 50-50.
Right.
You know the odds are 50-50. So if you say, right, there's going to be 10 coin tosses, write them, imagine what would happen for 10 coin tosses.
Right.
And write them down. So what coin toss 1
so
is?
Heads, tails, heads,
right.
heads.
So when they do this experiment, no one ever has more than 3 heads or tails in a row.
I wonder why.
Because the human brain can't simulate probability. Randomness. It can't. So we kind of know that it's a 50-50.
So your brain can't simulate randomness.
Right. So we kind of know that it's 50-50, but no one writes down 10 heads, 1 tail, 10 heads, 1 tail, because that doesn't, even though that is probable in a 50-50 coin toss, that could happen. No one actually
writes that down because that doesn't seem random.
Right.
I understand what you're saying now. Well, like not the rabbit hole on randomness, but
we're running out of entropy apparently.
Well, I think so. Yeah, like I listen to Spotify and you randomize your playlist,
which isn't random at all.
It isn't random at all. It's like the same. If you hit random, it plays the same songs in the same order every time.
Yes. So there is a way around that.
How?
You add or delete a song from your playlist.
Oh, and it will change the random order.
Yeah.
Interesting. Here's a book you should read.
You're holding it up to the microphone.
Can you hear the title of this book?
Tell our listeners of the tome. I mean, that thing could be a doorstop.
This is called The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. Just Google it.
I can see that it's a hefty tome.
It is a hefty tome, but you'll be like, I can't believe you recommended this to me. Look it up.
All right.
It was recommended to me. I recommend everybody look it up. You'll be like, oh my God, that book's you shouldn't be promoting that book.
Give me
it's terrible.
Come on, give me a spoiler-free.
So this book,
but just read the back cover.
The best-selling book for those who want power, watch power, or want to arm themselves against power.
Ooh, so it's the amoral, it's the Prince rewritten.
It's amoral, cunning, ruthless, and instructive. This piercing work distills 3,000 years of history of power into 48 well-explained laws.
Okay.
As attention-grabbing in its design as it is in its content, this bold volume outlines the laws of power in their unvarnished essence.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Go to the back page. How many pages are there in this tome?
How many pages? 429 pages.
It looks bigger than that. It must be very big print.
Yeah, it is. It's only 429 pages.
Because The Prince by Machiavelli is only 244 pages.
It's a super interesting book.
Have you read The Prince by Machiavelli?
No, I have not.
Well, you should, because I imagine that they've just ripped off the prince and reconstituted it into something else.
Here's some of the laws. Never outshine the master. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use their enemies. Conceal your intentions. Always say less than necessary. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Court attention at all costs. Get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit.
So this to me sounds like somebody took The Prince by Machiavelli and Sun Tzu's The Art of War and combined them together into a single book.
Yeah. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. Win through your actions, never through your argument. Infection. Avoid the unhappy and the unlucky. Learn to keep people dependent upon you. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim.
So when I was a very precocious young man, and I did an internship with Procter and Gamble, they asked me to do a project. And at the time, Procter and Gamble was super into the Stephen R. Covey stuff, 7 Habits of Effective People. I think
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so the 7 Habits of Effective People by Stephen Covey, and they all had 7 Habits diaries and all this kind of stuff. It was almost cult-like. They asked me to do a project, and for some bizarre reason, I just read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and I noticed a similarity between Sun Tzu's The Art of War and the 7 Habits of Effective People.
So you started to transpose them?
So I wrote that was my project to align the 7 Habits of Effective People with Sun Tzu's teachings. And if I'd been even more precocious, I probably could have worked in Machiavelli's The Prince as well.
But would you have kept your job if you had done that?
Oh, maybe. Well, I was an intern. I was a lowly intern. They smiled and clapped when I made the presentation, but I don't think it went much further than that. Although there are some really strange ones. There's like things like send your enemies women and boys to keep them distracted.
We should revive that in today's modern workplace.
I think there are certain people who do, and they've gotten into a lot of trouble for it. It's all about diversity, just like we said, and diversity includes generational diversity. Different generations have different ways of thinking about the world and viewing the world, and therefore it would be wrong for us as Generation Xers to believe that we have all the best ideas. There must be interns that have insight and ideas that we can learn from. So I have no problem with generational diversity.
Yeah, we should get, like, my son just graduated high school like a week ago. He's 17. And so for his graduation, I took him to get a new iPhone. And so
a green one?
We go in.
Was it
not a green one? No, but there was great debate about whether to get a green one or a black one. And then, like, he picked the black one. And then, like, right when we got it and they were programmed, I was like, dude, you should have got a green one. He's like, oh, really? Should I got? I'm like, no, dude, I'm kidding. But so when he was getting the phone and they were helping him, like, transfer his stuff from his old phone from his new phone, the lady was like, what's your phone number? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, dude, you're 7. How do you not know your phone number, man?
I remember my phone. The only phone number I actually remember is my original home phone number from when I was 7 years old.
Do you remember that number?
I do. It was 787-3279.
The current phone number I have now, I've had for literally 20 years. That's the only number I remember. But it's the same phone number I've had since I knew you when I met you. It's the same phone number. But
this was my parents. This was the number that before mobiles, that you had to remember your friends' phone numbers, because when you went to the payphone to call them, you had to remember their number, because you didn't need to know the prefixes. Everyone's prefixes was the same. In that neighborhood, it was always 787 or 783 or 78 whatever.
We need to get him on the show, dude. We need to get a 17-year-old on here and ask him some questions. And he has very interesting language, words that I don't understand, like cringe.
We had a startup in 2000 couple of friends of mine and we had a startup, and we were doing SMS text messaging apps in 2000, and we thought we were pretty cool. We were probably 25 or so.
Yeah.
The guys who were building the startup were 25. We thought we knew a lot of stuff, but what we didn't know was how the youth, how the kids were actually using SMS text messaging. So we brought in a guy who used to work for a company called Carphone Warehouse, and that was his sort of part-time job. His part-time job was working for Carphone Warehouse. So he knew more about mobile phones and text messages at age 18 than we did at age 25.
Right.
So, we were relying on him heavily as to how the youth used SMS, and as you say, certain vocabulary that made absolutely no sense to us, but he educated us about.
No, today was just a ramble.
That's fine. We'll edit it together. It'll sound like we're perfectly cogent.
All right. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Corey. And you're out for the next couple of weeks, but we might have some phone-in interviews from the road. And
I can. I'm going to take my recorder with me to Toronto.
Yeah, nice.
Cheers.
All right, buddy. Always a pleasure. Speak to you soon.
Yes, sir.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.